Thanks, Megan. Thank you, Synovus, for making this possible, and thanks everyone for showing up. I'm excited to be here at U of C. I love speaking at universities, and I'm on the faculty at a university in Chicago, Northwestern, and I had a really interesting experience speaking at a university recently. I was invited to speak at King Fahd University in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, which was an interesting jaunt, and it was an interesting experience. And at one point, I had to go to the bathroom, so I said, "Hey, do you guys know where the bathroom is? I'm looking for the men's room." And they sort of stared at me, and they're like, "Yeah, they're all men's rooms. There's no women allowed in the university." I was like, "Alrighty then." So it's really great to be a university that actually has women's rooms. So let's hear it for that. And ones that work, no less. So happy to be here. Let me start by asking you a question. I would like to know how many right-handed people are in the room, by hopefully raising your right hand. That's a lot. Okay, and how many lefties are in the room? All right, maybe 10, 12. How many ambidextrous people are in the room? There's one back there. Raise your hand if you're ambidextrous. We always usually have at least one. What is your name? Jeannie. Jeannie?
Yeah. I write with my left and everything else with my right.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, Jeannie, the theme of today is thinking ambidextrously. So I'm going to ask you at the end of my speech to come up and make 2 minutes of comments about what you think I said. So you have a few minutes to take some notes, but I want us to start to open up our minds to think in a different way, to truly think ambidextrously. We're in a world today, right now, that is stuck in 2 dimensions. Our governments are stuck in 2 dimensions, either one extreme or the other. We're either funding social programs that we can't afford to do, or we're raising taxes, and we can't raise more taxes, but we can't cut social programs, and we're stuck. I was just on the phone with a city councilor from Toronto the other day who told me they have $845 million worth of debt in the city of Toronto Housing Authority. And they have $845 million worth of repairs they have to make and a waiting list of 10,000 people. They can't tax people anymore, and we can't cut those programs because we have 10,000 people. So we're stuck. And we think in 2 dimensions in so many ways. We think of business and charity. In Imagine Canada, we have a 1% club, right? So after we're done paying our bills and covering all the costs and returning funds to shareholders, investing in R&D, we give 1% to charity. I want to know what about that other 99%? That's how we need to start thinking, is not about business and charity, black and white, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, but start to think about how do we think in a third way? How do we find an ambidextrous type of solution to a lot of the problems that are facing us today? Because we are living in a fundamentally different world, one that is begging us to operate in 3 dimensions, one that is presented us with problems that we can't solve solely with one side of our brain, and problems that we can't solve solely from the nonprofit sector, or solely from the corporate sector, or from government alone. So that's the theme today, is how do we start to think outside the box? And we're going to talk about measurement as well, but in a different way. And I remember one of the first times I gave a speech at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, where I teach on measurement. It was an executive program, and one of the people in the audience raised their hand, and they said, "Jason, I hear what you're saying about measurement. I get it. I know it's important, but you don't understand. We're doing God's work. You can't measure what we do. We're taking prostitutes off the streets and getting them in affordable housing and trying to get them back in society, and you just can't measure that." kind of thought for a second. I said, it's funny you say that because they taught me in Sunday school that God measured his own work, right? I mean, he built the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So we know the benchmark for building a world is 6, right? So if God measured what he's doing, you can measure what you're doing. It ain't easy, but we can do it. So with that bit of providence inspiration, let's move forward. Here's a statistic that might be surprising to you. Fundraising is really expensive, and maybe that's not surprising, but how expensive it actually is surprising. The average cost per $100 raised for a political campaign in the U.S. is about $4. The average cost per $100 raised for a corporation when they're raising capital for exploration or for expanding their business is $4 for every $100 raised. The average cost for $100 raised for a nonprofit organization is $20. Sometimes as high as $120 for every $100 raised when we're buying direct mail lists and things like that. Why is it so expensive? Actually, why is it so expensive? Why do you think? This is the audience response part of the speech. Who's got an idea? Yes.
Well, I think part of it might be economies of scale. You've got all kinds of nonprofits, but they're very small and not necessarily an institution. I think corporations and all that have machines on them. Perhaps the economies of scale.
Okay, so economies of scale. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I think that we go to different markets to get our money.
Okay, so we go to different markets to go. What market do we go to?
The nonprofits only look at charitable giving or corporations' charitable giving, whereas corporations have a way bigger market that they have.
Okay, so we have a smaller market. We're fishing in a smaller pond. Economies of scale? Yes, sir. There are institutions and mechanisms designed to facilitate that type of fundraising for companies.
I think that it's in our value proposition. We use a different approach and different language in trying to support than a political entity or a corporation.
What language do we use to try to solicit support?
Well, for me, it still lies with the open begging hand.
Thanks.
That justifying the support by tears and distended bellies and flies in the eyes.
Yes, ma'am.
I think when you're contributing to a presidential campaign, you know what you're getting. You're paying your support to that person standing for that party. In a not-for-profit, we're not always clear on, like, maybe what
What we're getting. Yeah. So, the language, the value proposition, what we're getting, economies of scale, mechanisms.
Just a quick question. Could you clarify what you're including under the idea of cost?
Yes.
Could I ask my question first? Because it relates to that. Or,
Yes, well, very quickly, this is sourced from a McKinsey study that was conducted, and basically it was taken out of the tax returns of nonprofits about what they deemed, what the regulations deemed as fundraising-related expense. So it was an allocation of overhead plus the direct cost of fundraising. Yes?
I don't think you're comparing apples to apples.
Okay.
And particularly in terms of corporations raising capital funds, because I would characterize fundraising in a nonprofit organization more as R&D, similar to R&D, rather than as raising capital, because it's an essential and core component, and it a dollar invested in fundraising, you can leverage it into many more dollars. And I just don't think that a $20 cost of fundraising is high either. If you compare it to the R&D of most corporations, it's probably low. So I think you're comparing it to the wrong thing. And
Yeah.
I think with the political campaigns, particularly Obama, if I hear one more time, we need to do what Obama did, who had the entire world focused on him. God only, don't we all wish we could have that for our nonprofits?
All right. There you go. Well, I appreciate your points. I mean, my quick thoughts on the way that we're building the statistics. These are the costs per acquiring money, not necessarily what we're doing with the money. So I agree that the money that we're raising through fundraising is effectively used for R&D and for growing organizations, and that's a very valid purpose. But it's expensive for us to get that money, is the point. More expensive than for others to access capital. And there's, I mean, all of your comments go to a theme which relates to the value proposition that we have to offer the people that we're asking money for, right? And especially if it is for R&D and for funding, not just covering our costs, but for funding the growth and the important research and work that we're doing to grow our organizations. The simple fact of the matter is this. We have no leverage. We are trafficking in the currency of psychic benefit. Most of us in nonprofits are selling feel-good. We believe in our mission, we know we're changing the world in a good way, and we want you to support it. But we have no leverage over our funders, over donors. I've never met a program officer at a foundation that would get fired if they don't give any of us a grant. And I've never seen a program officer at a foundation get a bonus if they do give us a grant. It's nice if they do, but most foundations are not outcomes driven. They're not held to particular result or to produce a particular benefit. At least in the US, many of the foundations are only held to one particular compliance requirement, and that is that they give away 5% of their money every year. Most donors aren't going to lose sleep if they don't fund us. And that brings up a really profound but important underlying problem in our sector, which is that we are in a sector that has a disconnect between supply and demand. The suppliers of money to our work, to our sector, are not the consumers of our outcomes. And that's the biggest problem we have. Right? The people who give money to the food bank in Calgary probably don't eat there. The people who give money to a homeless shelter probably don't sleep there. And so what we've done and what we've set up for ourselves is a situation where we are selling feel-good to people who don't have to have what we have to sell. Moreover, our currency, the currency of feel-good, is getting weaker, in large part because there's a lot of good-feeling stuff to go around. Everyone in this room who I've met is doing good things, and I could feel good about supporting all of you. But the growth of the nonprofit sector is metastatic. It's exponential. At least in the US, nonprofits are growing at a clip of 50,000 new organizations every year. And at the same time, the traditional sources of funding for our work are drying up. Government funding is declining substantially, and it's going to fall off a cliff in a matter of a year or two. The sources of philanthropy are flat at best, if not declining slightly. And when you look at an expanding denominator and a static numerator, we realize that we have to really fundamentally rethink the business model of social change. Because our existing model of asking for donations and operating as a charity is becoming anachronistic. At the same time, something profound and amazing is happening in society today. And that is that, well, we won. We won. All of the things that we always believed to be true, people now accept in the mainstream economy. That the environment is so important to be protected. People value that now, not just as a nice thing to do, but the economy values that. That education is so critical for the future competitiveness of our country. That youth and creativity is critical for innovation and R&D in corporations and in startups. That issues like international development and emerging economies, while we may think of that as eradicating poverty, the business world looks at that as growth opportunities. In fact, by the year 2050, 80% of all consumers will live in emerging economies, not in what we call the first world. So all of the things that we traditionally think of as doing good are now economically imperative. And we are in pain because we are not solving social problems. We have friends in Chicago that are paying $18,000 a year for kindergarten because the public schools aren't good enough. McDonald's is losing market share to Chipotle and to Subway and to other more health-conscious brands because people think their food is unhealthy. That's not just a nice thing to do to help with obesity. That's a major business problem for McDonald's. Kraft Foods, one of the largest manufacturers of chocolate in the world, is in trouble because they can't find enough people to farm cocoa in this world. And 70% of their cocoa supply comes from one country, the Ivory Coast, which is not the most stable political place in the world. So all of the people that are focused on helping smallholder farmers find more sustainable livelihoods in developing countries now have a real way to plug into the market, because on the other side, you have people who value that outcome. And so you realize that social outcomes now have real economic value. And that is a very powerful thing if we seize on it, because we don't have to beg anymore. We have economic power now. We are producing outcomes that the market values and has to have. And think about a food bank. At least in the US, we have food stamps, right, or benefits for people who can't afford food. Most food banks provide meals to people, but then those people are hungry again 8 hours, 6 hours later. Well, for me, it's like 2 hours later, but we're hungry again soon. Imagine in the US if food banks also signed up people for food stamps. In the US, 1/3 of all people that are eligible for supplemental assistance for food don't receive those food stamps because they don't know how to access them, they don't speak the language, whatever. So let's say the food bank in Chicago signed up 100,000 people for food stamps while they're giving them meals. The average food stamp benefit is $125 a month. Now, you can look at that as we've just done some good. We've helped some people get a little more economically stable. But you could also follow the benefits upstream of what you've just produced. We've just created $12.5 million a month of new economic spending, $150 million a year, just by achieving our social mission. Now here's another statistic. 25% of all food stamps in America are spent at one store. Anyone know what it is? Walmart. So now, are you going to go through the back door to the Walmart Foundation and beg Margaret McKenna for 25 grand? Or are we going to go through the front door to the head of Walmart sales and marketing and say, I want $1 million now? That's selling your impact. That is realizing the fact that there are people that are free riding off the outcomes we are producing. And we are not realizing the benefits of our work because we're not selling well enough. We are asking nice rich people to support us out of the goodness of their heart, rather than tapping into the engine of the economy to pay the freight for the work that we're doing. And the minute we realize that the market values what we do and we find the ways in which we plug in to that market equation, where by cleaning up homelessness in downtown Vancouver, we are gentrifying that neighborhood and doubling property values for all those investors who own all those properties downtown. Where by setting up a YMCA in Crowfoot, we are actually providing a benefit to the developers that are trying to sell all their real estate developments in that neighborhood. Where by focusing on science, math, and technology, we are producing a pipeline of engineers that is going to help Synovus and other companies dramatically expand their workforce. We have to realize the fact that we are producing a social value proposition to the market. We are not just doing good. We are producing outcomes that have value. And that is the moment when we change the equation from asking for psychic feel-good donations to selling impact. Now, I'm not saying stop taking the money. Take the money. Anybody who wants to give you money because they believe in what you're doing, that's great. I'm just saying that we need to diversify our revenue streams, and we need to empower ourselves with more leverage so that we don't have to spin as many wheels asking people. I mean, in the US, the way we raise money is we buy these lists of rich people based on where their zip codes are and what kind of assets they own or how big their house is, and then we send them like fundraising appeals, hoping that they might give us some money. That's crazy. I mean, I remember reading on the cover of Advancing Philanthropy, the kind of Association of Fundraising Professionals fundraising magazine a couple months ago. The cover story was on studying body language of donors. And by looking at their hand gestures, you can figure out whether they're really interested or not. I mean, what are we doing? This is what our work has come to. We are the most important people in society. We are changing the world. We are doing God's work, but it's time that we honor the work that we're doing and empower ourselves to operate differently. I worked with the head of Easter Seals of America. I know they have some Easter Seals chapters up here. They provide services to kids with disabilities. And they were trying to raise money from a particular foundation. And so they called the head of programs at the foundation. This is the CEO of the whole national organization. And he said, okay, I've heard about you. Let's set up a call. So they set up a call. And he said, that sounds interesting. Why don't you send me a proposal? So they worked for a couple of weeks. They put a proposal together, night and day, hours. They sent the proposal. 3 days later, they got a letter in the mail saying, thank you very much for your proposal. Your application's been rejected. It doesn't fit our guidelines. And he said, well, there's no possible way they could have even looked at this. I mean, so he called up the program officer's assistant, and she said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is a computer glitch. You're not rejected. So we'll set up a call in 4 weeks with the program officer again. So she does. The program officer says, I'm not the right guy to talk to. I'm the head of programs. I have a program officer that focuses on youth and vulnerable youth. Let's have you talk to him. Now 3 more weeks goes by. They have a call set up with this guy. He doesn't show up for the call. This may sound familiar. They finally reschedule the call for 3 more weeks later. This is now like 4 months into it, and one of the guys who's probably doing the most important job in society, wasting his time chasing a program officer at this foundation, and they set up the call, and the program officer says, hey, Jim, thank you for your grant proposal. I saw it. Let me just start the call by saying, we'll never give you a grant. But what you're doing is really interesting. Tell me more about vulnerable kids and why we should care about kids with disabilities. Maybe you can come up to our foundation and hold a little seminar and educate us. We'll never fund you. We just want to make that clear, so don't waste your time here. But educate us. We want to build a rapport with you. What are we doing? I mean, he's chasing $25,000 for months and months and months. At the same time, when we started to look at the outcomes that this organization was producing, helping kids with disabilities, and particularly autism, to become socially more integrated and to be able to get certain therapies that would allow them to function better, we started to realize that there were people who valued that outcome, not just moms and families that had kids with autism, but at least in the United States, in most states, insurance does not cover your child with autism. They don't consider that to be a medical issue. It's a developmental problem for some crazy reason. And in the last 2 or 3 years, 30 states have changed their laws to require that insurance companies cover autism. Well, now those insurance companies are in a world of hurt because they don't know how to provide autism services. They don't have any providers or partners to do that, let alone people that are best in class. So there was a small little pilot with Easter Seals in California that was doing an autism program in partnership with one of the insurance companies. So we went to that insurance company, we did some research and put a business case together, not for the foundation, but for the head of patient services who was in pain because they needed full spectrum autism providers rather than these mom and pop shops that could provide world-class service. We built a business case that showed how Easter Seals could solve the problem of this particular company and provide services that were top-notch to all of their families. They had 8,000 families with autism, and they were reimbursing up to $30,000 a year per family. That's a $240 million market opportunity. So which one are we going to chase? The program officer for $25,000 or this thing? So we set their sights on this thing. 2 weeks ago, they signed a $100 million contract with this company to provide autism services to every single one of their kids. And, oh, by the way, subsidize autism services for any kid in the state who possibly couldn't afford it because they were making so much retained earnings off this project. That is how we start to sell our impact. And more importantly, it's how we start to solve social problems. Because I think it's time for us to raise the bar. I love this picture. I think we may well have set the bar too low, not just in nonprofits, but for corporations and for governments as well. The way in which we are going about the business of social change is based on doing good, not solving social problems. And in many cases, it's not even about doing good, it's about doing less bad. Anyone know what Google's corporate tagline is? Who said that? Right? Do no evil. Really? I mean, is that the best we could do? Does not be bad? The standards that we hold corporations to today are based on not being bad. Don't pollute, don't mistreat your workers. If you look on these water bottles, on the back it'll say like, a smaller cap equals less plastic. We're doing good for the environment. No, you're not. You're just not doing bad. We're just doing less worse. Really, we're not planting new trees or anything. So on some level, we have set the bar too low. And then in the nonprofit sector, for many of us, we've also set the bar too low where we are focused on doing good and hoping it adds up to something rather than aiming at a high-value outcome and solving a problem. And the market that has emerged for social change, what I call the social capital market, that attaches tremendous economic value to what we're doing, is asking us to solve problems. There is only value that's created if we're solving a problem. Doing good is important, but we can aim higher. And if you start to look at the third way, the ambidextrous solution, the ambidextrous solution to the problem, it is about social value and economic value. It's not just about charity. Because frankly, most of the small-scale donations don't allow us to do much good. I can't solve problems for $100,000 or $200,000. But if we tap into the market, if we start to insert ourselves into the stream of commerce and figure out how to leverage the capital that exists, we can have a tremendous impact. But the only way that corporations are going to work together with us is not based on the fumes of that 1%. It's tapping into the 99% that they have in their coffers. Corporations last year generated more profit than ever before in history. At least in the US, last year, corporations generated $1.8 trillion in profits. Now, the federal government rang up $1.8 trillion in debt. Where are you going to look for the future of social change? Who's going to pay the freight for social change? It's not coming from government, and it's not going to come from the leftovers of people's largesse. It's going to come from tapping into the market. So I want us to start to think about a higher value proposition, something that allows us to create significant social change and significant economic value. It's what I call social value, or creating our social value proposition. And it requires three things. First, we got to know what our outcomes are, because we can't sell anything if we don't know our inventory. That doesn't mean our programs. It means what changes in society, what changes in behavior, attitude, condition are we producing through our work. First, we got to be able to capture our impact. The second thing is we got to be able to market our impact. We got to be able to find who are the impact buyers. Who are the people who value our outcomes and are willing to pay for them? That's the third way, right? It's not the nice rich people who have money but don't consume or value our outcomes directly, although their support is critical, but it's not sufficient. And it's not the people who are the beneficiaries who value what we're doing and consume it but don't have any money. It's a third way. And I'm going to talk about who those impact buyers are and share with you how we can go about solving them. So this is the metaphor I want us to keep in our head today. The engine, not the fumes. The engine, not the fumes. Most donations are basically leftover money. And a lot of volunteering is leftover time. But if we realize the fact that we can produce value for those experiences, then we're tapping into a much larger place. Volunteering is critical, but getting a few employees here and there is great. We want to be able to get the core of the business employees to help us solve our problems. I mean, look at what Free the Children is doing. They're getting people to pay to volunteer substantially, to go to developing countries, to build schools, to have those experiences. There is tremendous value that we have to offer the corporate world and individuals through the experience of volunteering, but we need to provide some valuable experience that they will find a reward in as well. So here is how the market is starting to play out, and the trends that I'm seeing are shifting, both in terms of how corporations are approaching solving social problems as well as how nonprofits are. We are shifting from a charity model to what I call social innovation. Social innovation is a strategy of producing social value and economic value. It's about leveraging the market to solve social problems, and it is about solving problems more than just doing a social program. And I will say that those two are not the same. While many of programs are good and they may even be effective, there is a difference between a program that does good and actually solving the problem. The big money is in solving the problem. So how do we shift from a charity model to a social innovation model, where Coca-Cola has a big problem, which is that in Africa, they can't get their product into the far-flung regions of the market that don't have roads where their big trucks can drive. So they created 10,000 jobs in Africa, what they call manual distribution centers, where people have push carts and bikes, and they employed 10,000 Africans that would otherwise be unemployed to be able to solve a business problem that they had, which is how do we distribute our product? That's using the market to sustainably solve a social problem. Now, we can quibble over whether it's a good product or not, but the point is there are opportunities there to be able to maximize the impact we're having. The same thing with the environment. We could do this, or we could do that. Right now, GE is spending $17 billion a year on eco-imagination. They're literally transforming the way corporations are using energy by creating diesel engines, more lean or green types of technologies, biofuels, and they're making a lot of money doing it, but they're investing a lot in innovating the next generation of technologies. GE, in fact, just invested $100 million in breast cancer, not in a charity, but in innovating new technologies for breast cancer screening and treatment, because they think there's a lot of money to be made in solving the problem. Everyone else is realizing that we're sitting on a huge asset. The value of solving social problems is the last great untapped market in the world. That's the last big market that has not been tapped, is social change. And we own that market. But people are going to start to take it away from us if we don't figure out how to innovate and sell it ourselves. So here's the mindset shift. If we're going to shift from operating in an independent sector, in a charitable mindset, to a social capital market, we need to realize that there's a fundamentally new set of stakeholders in the social capital market. Normally, when we think of stakeholders, we think of these people: our board, our donors, the government, foundations, people that value the psychic benefit of what we're doing. They feel good about it, and they have a stake in a very emotional sense, but not a direct stake. But if you shift from social benefit to social value or shared value, and you look at who are the people that are directly benefiting and better off as a result of the work we're doing, who are the impact buyers? And an impact buyer has two criteria. One, they consume our outcome directly, and two, they have an ability to pay. That's the ambidextrous approach that we need to start to think about. Who values our outcomes and consumes them? And there's a whole new set of stakeholders for us to think about. Right? The corporate partners are just one, but there are other service providers. We were talking yesterday with the YMCA, and they were saying that a lot of the disease state management organizations are struggling because they need to change the behavior of the people that they're serving. If you have diabetes, we need to change. If we're going to change the outcome, we got to change the behavior. Those organizations might have to rely on an organization like YMCA to be able to provide healthy lifestyles and an affordable option for healthy lifestyles. We can find a way of realizing the outcomes by partnering with other organizations and raising money together to solve a bigger problem. We can work with upstream consumers that are benefiting upstream. Beneficiaries can pay. When I went down to Kenya and saw in real life what a micro loan does when someone gets $300 to buy goats, and even though they're paying 30% interest or $90, it really doesn't matter because they're taking that $300, they bred like 5 goats into 20 goats. They're selling the goats off for $100 a piece. It doesn't matter. They built a business. Here's $90. Beneficiaries can pay. These people are living off $1 a day. So if they can pay, there are a lot of others. I mean, we are all paying in the U.S. for our education tremendously because we are banking on the fact that it's going to increase our earnings. So there is a new world of beneficiaries for us to look at who value and have the ability to pay. But this is the mother lode because the pie that we're chasing right now is tiny. I think it's about 10% of it in Canada, about $30 billion. But in the U.S., it's $300 billion, which sounds like a lot of money. But then you take away $100 billion for churches and religious institutions, and you got $200 billion. You divide that by 1 million nonprofits, and you got $200,000 per organization per year. I mean, it's nothing. We can't live off the fumes, the 1%. We have to figure out how to tap into the 99%. And the point is, we have that ability today. There is a social capital market that is emerging where the market values what we're doing, and we can tap into that. 20% of consumers are spending $230 billion a year on lifestyles of health and sustainability, buying socially conscious products and services. Companies are spending $32 billion a year on corporate social responsibility. There's over $2 trillion being invested in socially responsible investments. Impact investing is on the rise. We are spending $500 million or $500 billion a year in the US on educational outcomes. People are putting a price on social change, and we need to figure out how to tap that. So the opportunity is on both sides. For corporations, it's about how do we not just look at giving away charity, but buying impact. What impact do we want to buy? Every company in this room has got impact that they have to buy, social change that will enable and advance their business objectives. And on the other side, for nonprofits, we need to think about not just raising money, but selling our impact, finding the people that value our outcomes, identifying our social value proposition to the market, and then creating a business case and selling it. That's how we tap into the bigger pie. And here's a couple quick examples, and then I want to engage with you again. Many of you know about Ronald McDonald House Charities, right? And these Ronald McDonald Houses are all over the world. There's one in Saskatoon. I think there's one in Calgary. And we've worked to measure the impact of Ronald McDonald House all over the world. And we're measuring, how many families stay there per night, and are they satisfied, and how much money they're raising, and all the typical things you'd measure. But when we adopted a different mindset and we said, okay, who values the outcomes that we're producing? Well, certainly the families, because they're staying there, but most of them don't have any money. When we look at the realm of stakeholders, we look at the McDonald's Corporation, we looked at other suppliers, other business sponsors, the government, and then we tripped upon hospitals. Hospitals, 70% of the leading children's hospitals in North America have a Ronald McDonald program associated with them. Yet very few of them give any money to Ronald McDonald House. So we did some market research in order to investigate the social value proposition, right? And we asked questions like, do you value what we do? How vital is what we do to your business? Where are you benefiting from what we're doing? What would happen if we go away? And I asked those questions to the hospital administrators and the presidents of hospitals, and they said, well, you don't understand. I mean, but for Ronald McDonald House, we wouldn't get certain patients because they couldn't afford to come here. Moreover, our doctors and our nurses have higher employee satisfaction than when they work with other patients, with Ronald McDonald patients, because they're calmer, they're under less stress, they adhere to their treatment plans better, they have proximity right next to the hospital. And, oh, by the way, because of family-centered care, which Ronald McDonald House provides, our patients heal faster. And we supplemented this with some research that showed that, on average, patients with family-centered care exit the hospital 1/3 faster than the average patient. And the hospitals love that because they can turn over their beds faster, do more procedures, and make more money. So I had this conversation with the COO of the hospital, one of the largest in the US, and I said, so why don't you give any money to Ronald McDonald House? And he said, oh, well, they never ask us. They always just go next door to the hospital foundation and ask for $50,000. We are selling to the wrong people. We are selling feel-good to nice rich people when we should be selling our impact to the people who value and consume those outcomes. And that is what will liberate us from the captive whimsy of philanthropy. Not that we should stop taking money. Take it. All I'm saying is we need to empower ourselves and create leverage, because that's why fundraising is so expensive, and that's why we're wasting so much time chasing so few dollars. One more quick example. These guys at Free the Children, I started working with them a few years ago, and we were measuring their outcomes and starting to identify what outcomes are they producing. Student engagement and helping kids with character education and inspiring youth to be socially engaged and take social action. But then we started to realize, well, who values those outcomes? Well, the schools are actually getting money to pay for character education, but they don't know how to do it. So those schools are providing a significant funding stream to Free the Children to produce an outcome that they want to buy. It's not just charity. They have to have it. And then we happened upon RIM, Now, RIM's got a lot of problems of their own, but one of their biggest problems, I'm still a believer, I'm sorry, I love a BlackBerry. One of their biggest problems is the youth market. That's the fastest growing market for handheld devices, and they got a big problem. The youth market is like 40% iPhone, 40% Android, and 10% other, including BlackBerry. And they're in pain because they're not getting young kids to be inspired about their brand. So there's only two ways to win. You can win on technology, which probably isn't going to happen against Apple, or you can win on brand, building an emotional bond with consumers that make them irrationally connected to your brand, that make them go out of their way for your brand. It happens. How many people have bought Tom's shoes? Anyone know Tom's shoes? You know, you buy a pair of shoes, they give a shoe to a kid in a developing country. There's an emotional connection to that brand. Anybody buy Newman's Own salad dressing? There's 150 different types of salad dressing in the average grocery store. 16 different varieties of Italian alone. Why are we buying Newman's Own? It's not cheaper, it's not better placed, and it probably doesn't taste that much better. There's an emotional bond, and that's powerful. And RIM was very anxious to build an emotional bond with their employees, but also with consumers, and particularly the youth market. Now, Free the Children's got an asset. They got 1 million young kids on Facebook that are inspired about making a difference in the world. And if we could tap into that energy and that power and that emotion and connect it to a product that enabled Free the Children to advance their mission of connecting young people, allowing them to BlackBerry Messenger and find new friends and socially network, we could create that upper right social value proposition. So we sat down with the chief operating officer of RIM last year and talked to him about it. And we built a business case, not a case for support, a business case that showed how our outcomes could directly benefit and solve their pain. And last year, Free the Children got a $6 million check from RIM. That is selling your impact. It is about connecting our outcomes to the market and realizing the power that we have. And one final quick story. There's an organization that we work with that increases access to water around the world for kids that, or for people that don't have access to clean water. And they work in the poorest of the poor countries, Rwanda and Haiti and other places. And you ask the question, well, who values that outcome? I mean, they're just thirsty people, and no one's going to make any money giving them water. But if you do your market research and we identify who are the impact buyers, we started to realize that there were a lot of companies that in the water and wastewater industry were fully saturated, so to speak, in the developing world, and were looking for new emerging markets. And their emerging markets were in Africa. And so we went to them, we said, and how many of you have ever done this? We went to their corporate partners and we said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being this is just a nice thing to do to give us money, and 10, this is absolutely critical to your business, where do we rank? And you know what we heard? 3, which is the new 1, right? It's like, I don't want to say it, but it's 1. That's 3. But we didn't stop with that question. We said, what does it take to make it an 8? And they said, well, actually, we never thought about that before, but now that you ask, these are our top business objectives. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to expand our water, wastewater services, our engineering services, our metering products into developing countries. And come to think of it, you hold the keys to a lot of those countries, and you're building water economies in those countries. You could wire those countries for water, increase access, not just to those 50 people in the remote region, but to the entire country. So we went back and we innovated. And we said, instead of just helping this small village, let's wire the entire country for water. Let's be audacious. Let's produce high social impact and accelerate along the curve of our mission. And they went back to those companies, one of which gave them $12,000 last year, and they said, you know what? This is the impact we're producing. These are the outcomes that you said you value. Here is our social value proposition to you. So 2 weeks ago, they signed a contract for $1 million. And they're negotiating a $25 million contract with another company. That also gave them like $10,000 or $20,000. Simply because they sold their impact. They did not change their mission. They did not sell out. They sold up. And that's my challenge to you. Can we raise the bar? Can we move from doing good to solving social problems? Companies, can we move from doing charity and giving back to the community to creating solutions to social problems that advance our business? Can we tap into the engine of our business, not just the fumes? Can we leverage the huge platform that we have to bring about massive social change and to be able to be valuable to our companies and not just appreciated by them? So these are the laws of what I call selling your impact, and there are 7. 1, go through the front door, not the back door. Right? We don't need to be sheepish and ask for a handout. We can sell now because we know our customer, we've done our homework, we understand their pain, and we know our social value proposition. 2, always use value pricing, not cost plus. It doesn't cost Free the Children $6 million to be able to do what they're doing for RIM, but it's worth $6 million to RIM for them to do it. It doesn't cost that water charity $1 million to help to help create water economies, but it's worth it to that company to do it. And when you talk about research and development, that's where the funding needs to go. We don't need to cover our costs. We can't survive treading water and paying for our expenses and our salaries plus a little bit of overhead. That's just ridiculous. I mean, we can't live this way off secondhand computers and shoddy offices and underpaying ourselves. We're subsidizing social change ourselves. And we don't need to do that anymore. We need to let the market pay the freight for it, but we need to make a better, more compelling case. So use value pricing, not cost plus. It's not a function of what it costs us. It's a function of what that social change is worth. Third, we got to know our customer. We're never going to be able to sell if we don't truly understand their pain and do the market research and ask them, and they will tell you what is the pain. And it's not just for companies, it could be for governments. Governments need to cut budgets. If you as a nonprofit can produce twice the impact for half the cost, rather than going to the social service agency and asking for a grant, it's not in their interest to give it to you, but it could be in the legislator's interest or the appropriator's interest because they're the ones who have to cut the budget. So go upstream to the consumer that values the outcome the most. But we got to sell painkillers, not vitamins. Too often, nonprofits will approach companies and say, like, you could sponsor my event and it'll help you get in front of all these people. I mean, no one at BMO is going to buy the fact that we're going to sign up more bank accounts by sponsoring an event. It's the right thing to do, and it's a form of giving back, but we can sell painkillers instead of vitamins. We can go to BMO and say, hey, we know you want to be able to reach these other corporate partners. We're doing a volunteering event. Why don't we invite all the other corporate partners that you want to get to bank with to come join in the volunteering effort, because we got to get company people anyway. So why not get the people that are going to be strategic to you and have you sponsor that event? You know, sell painkillers, not vitamins. Finally, we need to sell outcomes and not just programs. Nobody wants to invest in a program. A program is a nice thing to do, but that's not producing a value proposition for someone. It's producing a benefit to us. And we need to think about how do we shift from our need to sell to the customer's need to buy. The first time Mark and Craig Kielburger sat in front of the CEO of RIM, they basically got thrown out of the office after 5 minutes. The CEO said, they showed a video of Craig and what he did and how great for the children was. And the CEO said, listen, this is really great. I've already researched your organization. I don't need to hear about you. I want to know, what are you going to do for me? How is this going to help my company? How is this going to help engage my employees? How is this going to help change our market share? And they left and went back and came up with a business case. And that's what closed the deal. But it's not about you, it's about them. At the same time, we can't oversell. We need to be credible. We need to back up what we're doing with data. And finally, we need to focus on rational buyers. There are a lot of idiosyncratic people out there who may or may not give us money. We can't influence them. We can ask them. We can build a relationship over a year or two and hope that that might result in something. And again, we shouldn't stop doing that, but we need to diversify and start to aim after rational buyers where we can sell. Look, at the end of the day, I think this is an enormous and exciting opportunity for us to fundamentally reinvent our business model, or at the very least, adjust a little bit and tap into a much bigger market. And it's really about innovation. It's about innovation. And it's time for us to innovate in this sector. The first time I ever learned about innovation, I learned from my father, who told me a story about a great uncle I had named Emanuel Merdinger, who was a chemist in Germany in the 1940s. And he got captured in the Holocaust and brought to a concentration camp. And they made him a day laborer. And at night, they made him 10 bar. And because he was a chemist, he started to experiment. And he started making his own beer. And the Nazi soldiers loved his beer. And he became kind of a cult hero. And every night, the Nazi soldiers would come and drink his beer. And one night, one of the soldiers got drunk. And they put a gun to his head. And they said, "Emmanuel, you give me the recipe to the beer, or I'll blow your brains out." I said, "Wow, Dad, what did he do?" And my dad said, "Well, if he gave him the recipe to the beer, they'd kill him. So they don't need him anymore. And if he refused and didn't give him the recipe to the beer, they'd kill him anyway." So I said, "So Dad, what did he do?" And he said, "Jason, it was easy. He gave him the recipe to the beer. And he said, 'Here, you can have it. It doesn't matter because I change it every week.'" And he survived the Holocaust and ultimately became a famous chemist and the U.S. ambassador to Hungary because he innovated. Because he innovated. And so I think it's time for us here in Calgary, in our market, to reinvent our beer. I want you guys to be the Uncle Emmanuels of the nonprofit sector. Thank you very much.